Yet this moment, the quietest prayer you'll ever pray, has a power that even the heavens cannot ignore. I've stood in lecture halls filled with neuroscientists and medical researchers who dedicate their lives to measuring the unseen, the electrical impulses of thought, the hidden chemical messengers coursing through the brain, the whispered signals that move between heart and mind. And I've stood in sanctuaries where a single whispered "help me" has changed the course of a life. There's a connection between these two worlds that is both humbling and astonishing. You see, the human brain is wired for prayer, even if some people don't call it that. Neuroscience shows us that even a fleeting moment of intentional thought, a sigh of hope, a wordless yearning, lights up networks that shape not only our emotions, but our biolo. Functional MRI scans reveal the anterior cingulate cortex sparking with activity when a person engages in quiet reflection or prayer. Stress hormones begin to lower, blood pressure softens, and the body starts to move out of survival mode and into repair. A whisper in your mind can literally reshape your physical reality. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's hard science. I remember a woman who came to me after a lecture years ago. Her life was unraveling. Her husband had left, her finances were crumbling, and her body was racked with a chronic illness that doctors said would only worsen. She told me she had no strength to pray out loud, no grand declarations of faith left in her. All she could muster was a breath, almost silent, in the dark of her bedroom. Say, "God, please," she thought no one heard. The next morning, a friend she hadn't spoken to in years called her, offering her a place to stay and a job opportunity. Within months, her health began to shift. Now, some will say, coincidence. But if you study enough stories like hers, and I have, you start to see a pattern too precise to ignore. Science tells us that even small changes in the brain's firing patterns can set off cascades of healing. When a single neuron misfires or realigns, it can redirect entire networks. The same principle is at work in the spiritual realm. A quiet prayer, uttered so softly it wouldn't reach another human ear, can realign the trajectory of a life. And here's why. The volume of your words is irrelevant to the one who designed your nervous system, who hears even what you do not say out loud. What matters is the alignment of your heart in that fragile, honest instant. I've seen seasoned researchers reduced to tears when they realize that the data they've been collecting for years confirms what generations of faithful hearts have known instinctively. When you pray, especially in your weakest whisper, you engage a system far larger than yourself. The parasympathetic nervous system, EA, SES tension, the prefrontal cortex organizes a sense of hope, and the amygdala, the brain's fear center, begins to calm. Your body interprets that quiet trust as safety, and in safety, healing begins. It is as if heaven itself leans in closer, not because your words were loud, but because they were real. Let me tell you about a man named Samuel. He was a decorated surgeon, a man whose hands had saved countless lives, yet he came to me trembling one evening after a medical conference. His own wife was dying of cancer. He confessed he felt powerless, though he had access to the best medicine in the world. "And I've shouted prayers," he said, "and I begged, but tonight all I can do is sit by her bed and whisper her name to God." The next morning, something shifted in him, not in the cancer yet, but in him. He felt a strange peace, a confidence he couldn't explain. Over the next weeks, her condition stabilized. Months later, she was in remission. We'll never claim to understand every mechanism at play. But I know this, the quietest prayer reached the loudest place in heaven, and heaven responded. Sometimes we imagine that to be heard, we must be dramatic, that heaven is like the world, impressed by volume and spectacle. But the greatest breakthroughs I've witnessed didn't begin with shouts. They began in hospital waiting rooms, in lonely apartments, in the silence of sleepless nights when a heart finally surrendered. I think of a young man I met at a neuroscience symposium, brilliant, but burdened by anxiety so crushing he could barely speak to strangers. One evening he told me he had reached the point of despair. He didn't recite any elaborate prayer. He simply sat in his car, closed his eyes, and thought, if there's anyone out there, I can't do this alone. That night, he said, was the first he slept without panic. His journey wasn't instantly easy, but that whisper became a turning point that changed his life. Even the tiniest electrical impulse in the brain has an echo. A whisper, be it an electrical signal or a word of prayer, does not vanish. Physics tells us energy is not destroyed, it transforms. So it is with your quietest cry. It does not disappear into silence. It is received, amplified, and answered in ways you may not see yet. The neurons in your brain will reorganize around a new pattern of hope, and the universe will conspire to weave circumstances you could not orchestrate on your own. I've watched mothers at neonatal intensive care units stand in hushed corners, eyes closed, lips barely moving, because their babies were too fragile for commotion. I've watched those same mothers bring home children doctors had written off. I've sat with soldiers who returned from war, too haunted by memories to pray aloud, but who closed their eyes in the dead of night and thought just one word, please. I've walked beside addicts who, at their lowest point, managed only a broken whisper, help. And I've seen transformations that no statistician could dismiss as mere chance. Sometimes you may feel your words are too small to matter. You may believe that unless you can muster a grand prayer or a flawless faith, your cry will be lost. But in the same way that the smallest shift in a heart's rhythm can restore life, the smallest shift in your spirit can draw heaven's attention. A tiny mustard seed of belief has always been enough to move mountains, not because of the seed's size, but because of the one who responds to it. I once met a neuroscientist who had spent his life studying the brain's response to music and prayer. He confessed that even after decades of research, the moments that humbled him most were the ones he couldn't quantify. He had observed patients in comas, unresponsive to sound or touch, whose brain scans showed remarkable bursts of activity when loved ones whispered prayers at their bedside. He couldn't explain it fully, but he admitted that in those quiet moments, something beyond science was at work. And the paradox, isn't it? The quietest prayer, inaudible to the person sitting next to you, can reverberate across eternity. Heaven hears it louder than your shouts, not because of decibels, but because of depth. The volume of your pain, your sincerity, your hope, it doesn't need to travel through the air to reach God. It travels through the fabric of your being, through a channel that cannot be blocked by walls, distance, or doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are sitting here tonight carrying something too heavy to articulate, know this: you do not have to impress heaven. You do not have to perform. You do not have to find perfect words. If all you can manage is a breath, a sigh, or even a thought that feels too fragile to matter, it is enough. The one who crafted galaxies hears the faintest whisper of your soul. The one who wired the neurons in your brain understands the language of your silence. There is a moment in every life when words fail. Perhaps you're in that moment now. Perhaps the diagnosis has come, the relationship is broken, the door you were counting on has slammed shut. You may feel that your prayers are too quiet to be noticed, but I promise you, those quietest prayers, spoken in surrender, whispered in faith, or groaned through tears, are the very ones that shake the foundations of heaven. They are the ones that move mountains, that part seas, that open doors no human hand could open. And when you leave here tonight and find yourself alone in your room or awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, remember this: you are never unheard. The stillness of your whisper is not a sign of weakness, but of trust. Trust that you don't need to shout to be saved. Trust that even the faintest flicker of faith is enough for heaven to act. Trust that sometimes the most powerful things in the universe happen in the smallest, quietest moments. Because it is in that quiet, when all pretense falls away and only the raw truth of your heart remains, that heaven hears you loudest. And perhaps you've wondered why it has to be that way. Why the universe seems to bend its ear closer when you are too weary to even speak aloud. I believe it is because in those unguarded whispers there is no performance, no attempt to manipulate or impress. It is the rawest, truest version of you. The noise of ego falls silent, the distractions of the world fade, and what remains is a soul reaching beyond itself. That kind of honesty carries a frequency that cannot be ignored. Even in physics, resonance occurs when two frequencies match. When your quiet cry aligns with the frequency of heaven, it resonates far louder than thunder. I think of a mother named Elena whose son was lost to addiction. Years of interventions, arguments, and sleepless nights had left her hollow. One evening she sat on the edge of her bed and whispered so faintly that even she could barely hear her own voice, "Please don't let this be the end for him." The next day, her son checked himself into a treatment program without her prompting. He later told her that he woke up with a sudden clarity, a thought that didn't feel like his own. There's still a way forward. Neuroscientists might talk about subconscious processing or latent readiness for change, but I've seen too many Elenas to doubt that something bigger was listening. We live in a culture obsessed with noise. Success is measured in how loudly you can broadcast, how many followers you can gather, how strong you can appear. But the deepest truths are often born in silence. When your mind grows still, your brain waves slow into patterns, theta waves, that scientists associate with creativity, healing, and spiritual awareness. In that slowed state, your body releases oxytocin, the hormone of trust and connection. The world might tell you to shout, but heaven invites you to whisper, to step into a place where the noise of performance falls away and you discover you are already being heard. There was a young woman I met after a health conference in Chicago. She had been battling depression so severe that every day felt like a storm. She told me she had reached a night when she could no longer bring herself to pray. She was too ashamed, too tired. But as she lay there in the dark, she thought, not even said, just thought, if there is still hope, show me. The next morning, she received a message from a college friend she hadn't spoken to in years, simply saying, I don't know why, but I felt like I should tell you, you're not alone. That message saved her life. It wasn't about timing or coincidence. It was about a whisper being amplified beyond her understanding. Sometimes, in the laboratories where I've spent my career, we use sensitive instruments to detect signals invisible to the naked eye. An EEG cap can pick up electrical activity from the brain measured in microvolts. A PET scanner can reveal metabolic changes in tissues before any outward symptom appears. The lesson is the same. Just because mything is quiet or hidden does not mean it is weak or insignificant. The same is true of prayer. Heaven does not measure worth by decibels, but by authenticity. A single silent plea spoken from a sincere heart can alter the trajectory of a life far more powerfully than 1,000 shouted words spoken without faith. I have seen hospital rooms filled with beeping machines, where families gathered around a loved one, too afraid to speak above a whisper. I've seen those moments when someone leaned close to a motionless figure and quietly said, "We're here. We love you. Don't give up." And I've seen fingers twitch, eyelids flutter, life stir again. Doctors will point to statistics or explain that hearing is often the last sense to fade, but I believe those whispers carry weight beyond biology. They carry the weight of love. And love is the language heaven understands best. Even in your own body, healing begins quietly. Cells knit together under the surface. Bones fuse in silence. The AAA. RT regenerates without fanfare. There is no noise when a wound closes overnight. The same is true of spiritual wounds. The restoration may begin without spectacle, in the stillness of a whispered prayer. Don't be discouraged if you don't see fireworks when you pray. The quiet work of heaven often begins invisibly, then unfolds in ways that later seem miraculous. I once walked with a man through a botanical garden after a conference. He was a biologist who had spent years studying how plants respond to sound and touch. He told me about experiments showing that even plants react differently when exposed to gentle vibrations, music, whispers of sound, compared to harsh noise. Even creation prefers gentleness, he said. If creation itself responds to quiet care, why would we expect heaven to demand shouting? The truth is, your quiet prayer may not only change your circumstances, but change you. The act of whispering your deepest need rewires your brain. It strengthens pathways of hope, Diki. Releases activity in the brain's threat centers and releases chemicals that soothe your body. Over time, those changes can transform how you see the world, making you more resilient, more compassionate, more tuned to the whispers of others. You become a conduit of quiet miracles in the lives around you. So tonight, as you think about what burdens you carry, know that you don't need to craft a perfect sentence or find a cathedral to be heard. Your bedroom can become a sanctuary. Your car can become a chapel. The smallest corner of your heart can become a place where eternity meets earth. And when you find yourself unable to speak above a whisper, or even at all, remember that silence itself can be a prayer. The one who hears you does not need volume to understand. He hears the tremble in your breath, the ache in your chest, the tear on your cheek. He knows. I leave you with this image, a night sky scattered with stars. From our perspective, some of those stars are faint, barely visible. Yet in reality, many of those faintest lights are the most powerful beacons in the universe. Their energy traveling across unfathomable distances to reach us. Your quietest prayer is like that faint star. To you, it may feel small, but its signal carries far beyond what you can imagine. And when it reaches its destination, it is not faint at all. It is received in full brilliance, as clear as if it had been shouted from the mountaintops. So, when the world grows loud and your strength feels gone, step into the quiet. Trust the whisper. Believe that even now, as your heart leans toward hope, heaven is leaning toward you. And in that sacred exchange, in that single, fragile, powerful whisper, know that you have been heard. And in that knowing, something within you begins to shift. The tightness in your chest loosens just a little. The heaviness on your shoulders lightens, and a small flame of courage sparks where despair once lived. That shift may not make headlines or show up on social media feeds, but it is the beginning of a miracle unfolding in real time. The quietest prayers have a way of rearranging the unseen architecture of your life before you even realize it. I've seen people walk into conferences like this one carrying years of regret, anger, and exhaustion, convinced that nothing could change. And yet, sitting in the back row, they close their eyes for just a moment, release a single unspoken plea, and everything begins to reorient. They leave not with all the answers, but with an undeniable sense that they are not alone. That is the sound of heaven, hearing you loudest when your voice is smallest. Think about the stories of those who've endured great trials and emerged stronger. Rarely were their breakthroughs forged in moments of noise and applause. More often they came in the quiet, on a lonely night in a hospital room or in the stillness of nature. A friend of mine, a cancer survivor, once told me that the most powerful moment of her life was not the day she got her final clean scan. It was the night she sat under a tree, too weak to cry, and whispered, "I'm scared." In that moment of surrender, she felt a peace she couldn't explain. She still had treatments ahead, but something essential shifted inside her. It was as if heaven had reached down and said, "Science said to hear you." Science confirms what faith has always proclaimed. The brain's plasticity means new connections can form at any moment, even after years of ingrained patterns. A single moment of hope can create a cascade of neurochemical changes that make resilience possible. The tiniest change, a thought, a breath, a whisper, can open a doorway to transformation. When you pray quietly, you are not just asking for help. You are rewiring your mind for healing and possibility. You are aligning yourself with something greater than the noise around you. So tonight, I urge you, don't wait for perfect conditions to pray. Don't wait until you feel strong or worthy or eloquent. Don't wait for a stage or a crowd or a choir. The quiet corner of your heart is enough. Heaven's hearing is flawless. It does not depend on microphones or amplifiers. It depends on honesty, humility, and a willingness to open your heart, even just a fraction. If you are grieving, let your whisper be your lifeline. If you are joyful, let your whisper be your gratitude. If you are confused, let your whisper be your question. And if you feel nothing at all, let your silence itself be your prayer. You may not feel anything change immediately. You may not see lightning or hear thunder, but the work has begun. Heaven has heard and something unseen has shifted. I think of the countless letters I've received over the years, stories from people who thought their quiet